All right, so in this video, we got to break down more alarming details in the Minnesota welfare fraud scandal that has become so massive that now the Department of Justice is calling it the largest pandemic relief fraud case in U.S. history. We're talking about up to $8 billion stolen, whistleblowers ignored, fraud networks protected, and Democrat leaders standing shoulder to shoulder with the very people now being arrested, while, get this, campaign records show the same networks were sending donations into Minnesota politics. So let's start at the top with the man who's now been arrested by ICE and not only has a track record of being seen with the likes of Ilhan Omar, Tim Walz, and other powerful Minnesota Democrats, but also welfare fraud.
Well, now investigators are tracking the web of fraud to other Minnesota Democrats, such as Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Many of the suspects linked to the scheme live in her district, including a restaurant owner who hosted events for her. He has since been convicted of stealing $12 million in COVID funds.
All right, this news just breaking moments ago. Fox News has obtained photos of one of the Somali illegal immigrants wrapped up in the Minnesota fraud scandal, posing with several high-profile Minnesota Democrats, including Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Governor Tim Walz. The man pictured is Abdul Dahir Ibrahim. He entered the country in 2000 and has had an order for removal since 2004. He also has a prior conviction in Canada for asylum and welfare fraud. ICE tells Fox News Ibrahim was granted temporary protected status for 10 years, but should have never been eligible. We are going to have more on this in our next hour.
All right. With each passing day, we're seeing how this story uncovers more and more fraud, because it turns out that the people at the center of this massive scheme, they weren't hiding in the shadows. They weren't quietly stealing in the dark. No. They were in photos with the likes of Ilhan Omar, Tim Walz, and multiple Minnesota Democrat power players, smiling, shaking hands, and getting full access. And now, thanks to brand new reporting, we know this wasn't just proximity. There were campaign donations involved too. A New York Post investigation found that Minnesota Democrat lawmakers received over $50,000 in campaign contributions. Take a look at the headline. From individuals tied to this very fraud network, the same network now being exposed as potentially the largest welfare theft in U.S. history. I don't think these were random checks, guys. They were targeted political investments coming from people who are now under indictment. And so the natural question that everyone has been asking, right, has been, where were the watchdogs, right? Where was the oversight? You know, Tim Walz definitely wasn't a part of that. Where was the leadership? Well, let's take a look at the man who should have been the first person demanding accountability, at least one of the first people, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, and pay very close attention to how he responds when confronted with over $1 billion in stolen taxpayer money. Take a listen.
I do want to ask you about the fraud scandal. I mean, because the president's comments seem at least in part fueled by, or he's talking about this fraud scandal that we mentioned earlier involving that charity called Feeding Our Future. The vast majority of these 70 defendants charged in the case were Somali. For perspective, those are nearly 80,000 Somalis in the state. How much, critics have said that state officials, including you and the governor, did not act fast enough or quickly enough to investigate charges of fraud against the Feeding Our Future, and did little to flag their allegations to federal authorities. I know you said it was the federal government that didn't move fast enough. Is there something you wish you had done differently?
No, first of all, the Department of Education denied claims when questionable claims were made about these meals. My office went to court, explained that to the court. A judge actually found the department in contempt for denying claims. And we cooperated fully and worked well with the FBI. We're glad that we took the action that we did.
I mean, imagine presiding over what may go down as the largest welfare theft in American history. And when you're asked if you do anything differently, you look the public in the eye and you say no. Give me a break. Keith Ellison isn't confused. He's comfortable. He's comfortable with zero accountability, comfortable with billions in taxpayer money disappearing, comfortable pretending as if he did everything in his power to stop this from happening. But we know that's not how any of this went down. Not when you had whistleblowers who are now coming out saying they were screaming in the background. Inspectors raised alarms. State employees warned their supervisors. People inside these programs were saying something is very, very wrong here. And what happened? Silence, deflection, political protection. And now we're seeing just how deep this goes. What we got now, nearly 80 people who were charged so far, close to 60 that have already been convicted. And remember, this is only based on what's been uncovered so far. New reports say that it could be as high as $8 billion across multiple programs. And only now, after years of warnings, arrests, convictions, and public outrage, is the state finally pausing parts of the program that started it all.
Fraud investigators are finding in Minnesota is growing by the day. Kelly Loeffler, who leads the Small Business Administration, says in the 2 days her agency has been investigating the state, they've uncovered at least $1 million in PPP fraud just 2 days in. Several of the whistleblowers in Minnesota have also told lawmakers they believe the total amount of fraud could total up to more than $8 billion. Governor Tim Walz, who is up for re-election, is under fire for all of this happening under his watch. But he says they have paused these programs. They've brought in outside auditors to get an idea of how far-reaching this fraud was. They're taking steps to keep it from happening again. And he's defending his management of the state while also taking shots at Republicans and the president.
And in spite of the headwinds we're up against, Minnesota ranks economically, economic growth, happiness, number of people insured, education levels, near the very top. So I'll tell you what, I have no interest in having this state look like Oklahoma or Mississippi. And if folks are going to commit crimes here, thinking because our generous spirit and our programs that we have is going to give them some kind of cover, they are sadly mistaken.
Have you ever had a moment that changed your life? One accident. One employer who doesn't care, one hospital bill you couldn't pay. That's how quick life can change. And when it does, you realize something fast. The big companies, the insurance giants, they don't care about you. They've got teams of lawyers whose only job is to protect their bottom line. But who's protecting you? There's a reason why it feels like traffic always jams when you're running late. Just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. For over 35 years, Morgan & Morgan has fought for the people, not the powerful. With 1,000 plus attorneys and more than 100 offices nationwide, they've recovered over $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients just like you. Whether you're a 41-year-old family man in Florida, struck by a driver who ran a red light, Morgan & Morgan secured a $9.3 million verdict. Or a father and Little League coach who suffered lasting injuries in a car crash, Morgan & Morgan secured a $6.1 million verdict. When you hire them, it's like hiring a legal army that has your back. Starting a claim is simple. You can get started right now from your phone. No hassle. You can click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen to see if you have a claim. Their fee is free unless they win. Because when life changes in an instant, you deserve a law firm that's ready to fight for you. See, for me, this is where the whole "we had no idea" excuse falls apart, because it's not just that these fraudsters existed in the same city as Ilhan Omar, Tim Walz, Keith Ellison, and the rest. No. It's that they were financially plugged into their campaigns and socially wrapped around their political lives. You guys already saw the report from the New York Times where Minnesota Democrats took over $53,000 in campaign cash from people who are now charged in this fraud, including the Attorney General Keith Ellison, who says he would do nothing different, as well as his son, Minneapolis Mayor Ilhan Omar, and others. And so this is what we know. They were collecting checks, the maximum allowed. That happened. Ilhan Omar's campaign, according to that same report, took in around $7,400 in donations from now convicted fraudsters connected to the Feeding Our Future scandal. And as always, there is some excuse. Her team says They quietly returned the money once the scandal blew up, of course, and claimed she knew nothing. Yeah, but the timing of the ties raised obvious questions about how in the dark anyone really was. And it doesn't stop at the checks. So now when Democrats try to act like they're blindsided by the scale of this fraud, you have to ask the question. If you're cashing their checks, eating at their restaurants, celebrating victory parties in their buildings, hiring them on your campaigns, and posing for photos with them over and over and over again, how shocked are you really supposed to be when these arrests like this happen? Take a listen.
ICE announcing the arrest of a Somali immigrant in Minnesota, seen pictured with local Democrat leaders, Governor Tim Walz and Congressman Ilhan Omar. ICE says that he was convicted of welfare fraud in Canada and should not have been eligible for temporary status here in the United States. Correspondent Garrett Tenney tells us the backstory here from Chicago. Hi, Garrett.
Yeah, Martha, the immigration judge in that Somali man's case denied his asylum request specifically because of the significant amount of fraud on his record. That was in 2004, but for some reason, Abdul Dahir Ibrahim was granted temporary protected status for 10 years, even after he had an order of removal. Altogether, DHS says it has arrested more than 12 individuals so far as part of its newly launched Operation Metro Surge in the Twin Cities. Those arrests include 5 other Somalis, 2 of which have also been convicted of fraud.
ICE has already made dozens and dozens of arrests, including a convicted murderer, convicted gang members who have just been released back onto Minneapolis' streets to terrorize their people. And it's such a shame that Tim Walz and the mayor there turn a blind eye and are really complicit in what's happening to Minneapolis.
All right. And so when you really zoom out, you realize this was never just about a couple free lunch programs or shady nonprofits. This was a full-blown fraud ecosystem. It started with the Feeding Our Future, the group at the center of this mess, which prosecutors say stole at least $250 million from federal child nutrition funds by claiming millions of fake meals that were never served. But it didn't stop there. A Wall Street Journal breakdown shows this thing spread into other social service programs too. Housing stabilization, adult day programs, and even autism treatment, with fake service companies billing the state for care that either never happened or was wildly inflated. And even to the point where you had parents that went along with the scheme for kickbacks. And now you have White House officials and senior advisors describing it as the single greatest theft of taxpayer dollars through welfare fraud in U.S. history. Take a listen.
Based on what we have found so far, we believe that the Somali fraud operation in Minnesota is the single greatest theft of taxpayer dollars through welfare fraud in American history. We believe that we have only scratched the very top of the surface of how deep this goes. And you're familiar with all the scams with pretending that children have autism who are not in fact autistic, with pretending to enroll people in food programs when in fact nobody was ever enrolled, and engaging in massive fraud, lying, and theft and grift on a scale we've never seen before in American history. The total bill, the total tab for this is going to be far beyond the numbers we've already seen reported. We believe the state government is fully complicit in this scheme, and we believe that what we are going to uncover is going to shock the American people. Look, based on the records that we already have, and this is a significant undercount, by the way, 75% of the Somali population in Minnesota is on welfare. But that's likely a significant undercount of just how much of a financial burden the Somali refugee population is imposing on this country.
Yeah, so there you guys have that. Listen, when you're dealing with a fraud operation of this size, billions in taxpayer money flowing through fake businesses, fake nonprofits, fake autism centers, fake meal sites, I don't think there's any way possible that this happens without political protection. None. You don't move hundreds of millions of federal dollars through a single state without somebody on a political level. And with the scale of the fraud that we know so far, with the campaign donations involved in it also, with the political access that these criminals had granted to them, there will need to be accountability on a political level. And so we'll have to wait and see. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. You cannot stop this from happening again if the same people who helped create the chaos are the ones who are allowed to fix it. And that's exactly what Tim Walz is trying to do now, suddenly acting like the adult in the room, right? Because if all we get from this are some news headlines, some press releases, then this entire investigation, the DOJ involvement, the whistleblower testimonies, whatever else comes out, it will all have just been a complete waste of everyone's time, because justice without accountability is just a news cycle. And Minnesota has way too many of those already. And speaking of avoiding accountability, you guys are going to love this, because while the rest of the country is talking about fraud, oversight failures, and political responsibility, Ilhan Omar, the rep from Minnesota, is trying to turn this entire scandal into a conversation about race and President Trump. Take a look at this.
To me, I know that those of us who are Somali in this country see ourselves as Americans. That's what our passport says. That's what our nationality is. And we know that we are protected by the 14th Amendment. We know that we're not going anywhere. And there is no way. I mean, he needs to just, I know he says he hasn't met me. Maybe he should spend 5 minutes with me, because then he would know that as Somalis, we are never intimidated, and, you know, we're never going to feel like our esteem or confidence is shaken by a bigoted fool, you know, making a mockery of the White House, of our nation, and of the presidency.
It's on them.
Well, it's that voter power thing. Yeah, like around Minneapolis and St. Paul and the suburbs, I don't know, they always go for these guys. Mm-hmm. They go for Walz, and Omar's a smaller district that's voting for her, but it is voter power. And what's interesting, and I don't know where this is going to go, but one thing you should know is in Minnesota, people have been documenting all of this and digging into this far longer than we've been talking about it at the national level. And there's some really good work there. Omar, just to name one guy, so there's a guy named Guhad Hashi Saeed, who was convicted in August of running a fake food site called Advanced Youth Athletic Development. Okay, whatever that was, definitely didn't serve food. But that guy worked for Omar in 2018 and 2020 as a campaign enforcer. So he made sure that folks in the Somali community in Minneapolis voted for her. Okay, that's the kind of people she consorted with. So what I would say is it's wintertime. There's ice in the lakes in Minnesota. It's very thin right now. When you get out on a thin ice, you might fall in. I think Omar's on very, very thin ice right now. And the more people dig into this, the more they're going to find she was not. This isn't just because programs were set up quickly.
Yeah.
No. Sorry. She knows the people who knew exactly how to crack.
But let's say that they were set up quickly.
They were, but that's not the problem. That's not the main problem.
But the spending stats are clear. I don't need an email to know that it went from one number to exponentially another number every single year, compounding over and over again.
Yeah. Another associate, another connection, another arrest. And listen, at some point, Democrats in Minnesota need to explain how all of these isolated incidents keep happening around the same political circle. How many of Ilhan Omar's associates have to be arrested before people admit this wasn't random? How many warnings need to be ignored before people realize this was a network, not just some coincidence? And how many billions of dollars have to disappear before voters, most importantly, demand better than this? But guys, let me know your thoughts down below. You know, I appreciate when you guys chime in. As always, best way to show you support and that you enjoy the content is by smashing that thumbs up. That tells me you like the video, and subscribe for more breakdowns like this.